What is the fastest you have ever seen a new co-worker get fired? Heard this from a manager I worked with when I worked in fast food. There was this one kid who didn't show up for work. He ditched work often, so the manager called around, couldn't get anyone to fill in his shift, so she had to fill it for him. A few hours into his shift, the dude ditching shows up with his friends and orders food from that manager. She fired him on the spot. Where to begin? One person didn't show up for their second day citing culture shock and then spent at least an hour each day complaining about everything to HR. They were gone inside of a month. Some other bloke refused to follow processes and called his manager an irrelevant woman in team meetings. Gone within a week. My favorite was technically a new co-worker from my perspective only as I'd only just become aware of their existence. They interpreted we're going to retire that server from production as we're going to throw the hardware off of the roof into a skip and proceeded to head down to the data center, power the thing off in the middle of the day, drive to his friend's office, plug the box in and deploy a bunch of IVR scripts he'd derived from our proprietary scripts so they could run a bunch of psychic and X hotlines. He was gone within 10 minutes of getting that server back. A week. I worked in a bar and a new girl started. At work, she seemed a little rough but was fine. One day she finished a shift, sat at the bar and ordered a red wine with lemonade and ice in it. Not really relevant to the story, just shows she is clearly insane. Her boyfriend came in, they had a huge domestic in front of my manager and several customers and she threw her drink over her BF and dramatically stormed out. Not sure if it counts as being fired, but a guy in our basic training threatened a drill sergeant with a bayonet. No idea what happened after he went to the hospital, but I didn't see him again. I work construction. We had 2 new hires that were friends starting the same day. Boss told one take a coffee order and come back. Took everyone's money and said he needed his friend to go with him cause it was a big order. They never came back. This was a while ago at my old job. New guy gets hired as a busboy. He was super annoying and tried to insert himself into everyone's conversation whether they wanted him there or not. It only took a couple of hours for the whole restaurant to hate him. I was working the bar and he kept eating the bar fruit. I personally didn't care but the manager did. Manager comes over and tells him to stop eating the fruit. He looks the manager in the eye and eats another piece of fruit. Manager says really? Followed by come with me to the office. New guy promptly replies with alright man, calm down. I can tell you got that big D energy for a good reason followed with cliche wink and nudge from his elbow. In front of me and like 4 other employees. I wanted to slam my face into the ice bin, it was so cringy to witness. He promptly walked out the front door 10 minutes later without his uniform on anymore. The worst thing about it was the manager was an insanely laid back guy. Hell, the whole restaurant was insanely laid back. You really had to try hard to get fired from this place. Had he not thrown in that big D line, I'm almost positive he would have just gotten a slap on the wrist and kept the job. New director starts, at lunchtime goes to cafeteria, pays for the first salad plate, by weight, then goes back twice for refills without paying. Cafeteria has cameras, cafeteria manager talks to the partner in charge. New director fired before the end of day. Director? I would assume a director level position would be paid enough to buy his own lunch salad. New guy started on Monday and was gone by Friday. The guy hit some racking in the warehouse with the forklift. Boss saw him do it, and the guy decided to lie about it when asked if he knew what happened. You don't tell me what to do, you're a woman. To his trainer. Lasted until management came in that morning and heard about it. First day of work, he walks in. Says what the frick is up dumbus to the guy that parked next to, didn't touch, his new Camaro he bought since he got hired. The guy was the CEO of the company I used to work for, on visit to our branch. Literally 10 minutes into his shift he was signing release papers. Spent my summers in college working as a laborer for a construction company. Anyway, we were doing a bunch of renovation in an active hospital, so noise and dust were a huge concern. We were a small crew and just starting renovations on an area with a super tight schedule, so the company hired a subcontractor for some of the work. Enter these two clowns who show up to do some demolition work. Foreman gives them the talk about how they may be used to doing things a certain way, but this is an active hospital so he'd rather the work take longer than for them to make a huge mess or a lot of noise. An hour later, we apparently got multiple complaints about the noise and the mess, so the foreman calls me up and says to go over there and clean up now, and that he'd be by shortly to see what the hell was going on. These dudes had dust and broken wool everywhere. I could hear them halfway down the hall, just smashing away without a care in the world. The foreman shows up and we walk into the room to witness this dude standing on a pile of rubble swinging a sledgehammer over his head at a brick wall that he's removed the bottom from. Somehow the rest of this wall is still hanging from the ceiling. I have no idea how. Guy wasn't even wearing a hard hat, apparently oblivious that at any moment that wall might give way and crush him. The foreman lost his freaking mind on these guys. Kicked them out immediately, and got on the phone with their company and told them he didn't want to see these guys on site again. Lots of choice 4-letter words were used, even threatened to fire the subcontractor entirely and get someone else to do the work. Couldn't pass the simple tests given at the end of new hire orientation. Yelled at test facilitator when she wouldn't just take the test for him. A 19-year-old kid got hired to work the seafood counter. See him twice and then never again. Asked a co-worker what happened. He had closed seafood one night and was walking out of the store and the 5 pounds of crab legs he'd stuffed down the back of his pants fell out in front of the closing manager. Edit, it was at a Publix. No, it was not Jammy's Winston. Guy got hired. While going through orientation realized that his ex-GF worked there too. Turned around and walked right out the front door. Co-worker quit his job. Great job, great pay, great benefits to work at a radio repair place. I mean, gotta do what you love, and he was also a big radio enthusiast. Got fired the first day on the job for stealing parts for his own radios at home. Took him over a year to get back with us. Surprised they rehired him. He then got fired for being a security risk about a year or so later. I got hired as a long-term temp with one other person to do some basic data entry work at a major brand pretty much everyone has heard of. And it was at their corporate headquarters, so pretty prestigious. Anyway, we went through all of this onboarding stuff in the morning that required us to get photo IDs and figure out parking and all that stuff. Then after 2 or 3 hours we were introduced to one of the employees in our new department who began going over what we were going to be doing. None of it seemed overly difficult, and I figured that while it was new system I had never used before, I'd be able to work it out in a few days as long as I asked questions and took notes. And that was the thing that made me realize that the other person who got hired with me probably lied on her resume and was completely out of her depth. She didn't take any notes and didn't ask any questions. And whenever I glanced at her I could see flashes of panic on her face. Well, lunchtime came, and when we came back she said that another company had called her and offered her a permanent position and she couldn't work with us any longer. Both me and the person training us knew what was going on, but I'll give the other lady credit for finding a way out without losing face too badly. The takeaway here is, yes, fake it until you make it can and does work. But you gotta be able to fake it. You can't fake faking it. Worked in a grocery store for a while. New guy took a lobster out of the tank and removed the elastic bands on its claws, then proceeded to put it back in the tank. The thing murdered all the other lobsters in the tank. 5 days. My boss hired an executive chef. Dude didn't even know how to make a quesadilla. Guy got hired, went through training and all that jazz. First day on the floor, he disappeared for 3 hours and then came back high as frick on like meth or something. A manager found him in the bathroom aisle, staring at himself in the mirror. Said manager looked at the cameras after firing him. The guy was there staring at himself for at least 30 plus minutes. Edit to clear up some questions. I worked at Home Depot. He was in the aisle where we sell bathroom countertops and medicine cabinets. We also have mirrors in this aisle and that's where he was. Not in the bathroom, haha. Corporate chain restaurant, new server, age mid-30s. Third day he was working, we had to fire him mid-shift. Why? Dude went into the public restrooms, with other guests clearly in there using the urinal, and started doing lines of blow off on the edge of the sink. The IT crew at a large government office worked on a ticket system, meaning that the government workers submitted their problem online and one of the IT guys would pick it up on their end. The new guy just started his first day, logged into a computer at an empty office, and submitted a reinstall entire OS request so he could spend all day there. The manager decided to check in on him before lunch to see how he was doing, and he was completely asleep. Fired before they even finished his hiring paperwork. I called a temp agency to get someone to help me count inventory. They sent the guy over with a cast on his arm. That was my first WTF, but I went with it because we were just counting parts. Then I came back from lunch and this dude was in my office chair zoned out and drooling on himself with a can of air duster in his lap. I kicked him awake and escorted him out of my warehouse. Never used that temp agency again. This was a pizza place I worked at in college. New guy was started on Thursday. Fine worker, we showed him the ropes. He was on subs, which is the easiest job. The instructions are right in front of your face. Friday he no call no shows, it's Friday. The busiest night of the week. And he and I were the only kitchen workers that weren't also drivers. Monday a police officer shows up at the restaurant looking for him. No idea what happened as he wasn't there. Tuesday the owner informed me he was let go. Guy slept through 2 meetings on his first day. The second meeting he started snoring. Guy had been working a few days at a barn. Decided to smoke right by bales of hay. Manager saw him and fired him right on the spot. At farms, you don't frick around with fire. Oh, I've got one for this. I was hired to do tech support in a call center. On our first day of training there were about 30 of us in a room and we each had our own computer. The instructor said it was okay to use the computer for personal stuff during downtime, but the only rules were no games and no prawn. One guy got fired before lunchtime because he just couldn't resist the prawn. A man was hired to do stock at a tea store that sold lots of delicate china. Manager walked into the back on his third day and saw him just throwing boxes of teacups and teapots. Instantly fired. Day 1 of training. Within the 6th hour of a 8-hour shift. Worked in an old crank handle service elevator at a private residential condominium for very wealthy people. We told him just shut up and stare straight ahead. Don't speak unless spoken to. Cause old rich people are mean and don't care about you. Well, what's the new guy do? Starts a conversation right away and asks the resident, how much money do you make? Edit. To be more clear, it was a 1920s skyscraper in downtown. As a teenager, I worked at a bowling alley. Within an hour, a new girl was fired on the spot for dropping a ball on the foot of a complaining patron. About 35 minutes I hired a guy to work for me as quality inspector for merchandise headed to Walmart and Target. He bragged about everything he stole from his last job during training and how they paid him more than I did. Well, I'm not holding him back from all that money, so I had some big guys escort him off the property. 3 hours into the first shift. Guy lost it serving an annoying customer in a grocery shop. Throw a cabbage at her. The manager came and told him to go home cause he finished there. He wasn't surprised. I was standing next to him. It was an entertaining day. I used to do a lot of field work on site investigation programs. Basically we'd hang out on a drill rig while the drillers took rock cores. We'd log the cores, take photos, do some downhole tests, etc. New engineer gets sent to site and gets assigned the night shift. Some people love night shift, but most people don't. Hence sticking the junior with night shift. After 5 nights he calls the office and says he wants to come home because he's freezing and he hates it and he can't do it. Not clear to me if he quit or got fired, but it became plain pretty quickly that this job wasn't for him. I got pulled onto that program, and I asked the drillers what the guy's deal was. They had a propane heater in the back of their van, and despite repeated invitations to sit in the back of the van, Buddy just sat in his truck all night and shivered. In the middle of February. Didn't like the boss and on the first day took a pee in the gas tank of his Jeep. Bragged about it and it was recorded too. Had a girl show up for her first day, then no call no show for the next 3 days. Needless to say she was off the schedule by the 4th day. Coworker. Smoked like every 40 minutes for like 10 minutes. Then asked the boss if he could leave an hour early because he didn't take his lunch break. As my boss said, sure you can, but you don't need to come back. Apostrophe. This was just a summer job at a fast food place. We had a new girl start and within 2 days it was apparent she was an idiot and everyone knew that. You could already see the manager questioning his decision. Then on her 3rd day of work she said she couldn't come in because her mom was in a car accident and in the hospital. Turns out that's an easy thing to disprove in a relatively small town. This guy hadn't even started yet and just had his introductory email sent out to the whole company which ended with incredibly explicit details about himself. He got fired before he even started. Email edit. While this is blowing up, I don't have a lot more context I can give as it all happened so fast. Somehow the company deleted the email from our cloud inboxes when this was sent, but not before a colleague grabbed a screenshot of it first. He was going to be a tier 2 tech for the IT company I work at a couple years back. He supposedly apologized profusely saying his friend played a prank on him but the damage had already been done. 4 or so hours. When I was 18 I got a job at a grocery store, along with 3 others. We all started training together. On the first day we were training in the evening, and one girl asked to go home. She said her head hurt. They said fine. She clocked out, went to grab a grocery cart and started filling it with beer and liquor. The store manager walked over and asked her if she was having a party. She said yes. Didn't even try to come up with an excuse. Just, yeah, I am. So I needed to leave early on my first day. Basically. He fired her. She was hired because the manager thought she was hot. Turned out she was 15 and unable to actually work there. He didn't show up the first day, second day, or third day. I had to work a double shift for 3 days straight. Not fun. I answered the phone when he finally called in on the 4th day. He said, I'm going to be honest with you, I've been in Orlando. My parents paid for a small vacation as a reward for getting the job. Would it be okay to start next week instead of this week? Apostrophe. Guy showed up to work on his first day with the smell of alcohol on his breath. 7 AM. When questioned he admitted to taking a couple swigs on the way using to calm his first day nerves. Yeah, fired on the spot. Worked here less than 20 minutes. Before their first day on orientation. I got hired for a manufacturing job through Manpower, a temp agency. Me and a friend of my wife were both supposed to start on Monday at the plant for a week-long orientation. She got into a fender bender on her way to orientation and called them to say that she'd be a bit late, that she just needed to wait on the police to give a statement. The manager told her not to bother ever coming in. Girl was torn up. She took pictures in the police report into the hiring manager, tried to explain things to the company HR managers, but no dice. She was fired before ever clocking in. I don't know if this counts as fired or quitting, but I was working at a grocery store, and in the morning we have to unpack the stuff from the truck. Well, this girl was on her second day, first time throwing truck, and she asked the manager to go out to her car to get something really quick. Long story short, she just drove off in the middle of her shift and never came back for another. Both were at a restaurant. They hired a doorman. Came to work the first day with a gun belt locked and loaded. This was a tiny little New England seafood restaurant and he just needed to check IDs of folks going into the bar. He didn't even get to punch in. On the line we had penne alla vodka on the menu. I don't want to ruin the magic that is cookery, but that dish had vodka in it. Bossman goes suspicious when he noticed when the level of the vodka dropped the odder the behavior or our new Sote guy became. During their onboarding training, they stole my boss's wallet on camera. 1 hour in. New guy drove a forklift into a fire hydrant in front of a safety rep for the company. His supervisor was called over, and he immediately tells the supervisor that he won't pass a pee test, as he used his only bottle of clean pee earlier that day when he hired in. Everybody standing there immediately burst into laughter, which continued as security, also laughing, escorted him off site. Even the supervisor was all smiles. Just gave him a pat on the back and wished him the best of luck. It was wild. We had a new guy come in, go through all of the training on starting in our factory, lockout, tag out and all of that stuff. Said he was an electrician. Then the very first job he was asked to do, he was found working on a machine with the power locked on. There are so many things wrong with that in an industrial setting, it's unbelievable. My boss pulled him out of the machine, said you're too stupid to work here, and walked him out of the building. I think he was an actual employee there for 3 days at that point and this was his first day actually on the production floor and not in training. Bonus story because I apparently can't read. We had a guy go through the interview process, come in for his first day, take a tour of the plant and go to his car and go home. It was a lime, no, not the fruit, processing plant. 2500 F, 1400 C, kilns that turn limestone into activated lime. The whole place is filthy dirty all of the time, everything about that job sucked. I made it 4 months before the S management and S working conditions outweighed the pay. I am not surprised we had so many people quit within the first couple days or weeks of employment there, but this one guy was the fastest. Edit, sorry, I saw fired, but for some reason though quit. Edit 2, for anyone confused about how he locked the power on. It was an electrical disconnect that mounts on the front of the electrical cabinet and has a handle that has a loop you can put a lock through. When it's in the up and on position, you can put a lock through the loop, but it doesn't do anything. This guy, after going through our worksite specific lotto, lockout tag out, course where they actually show you how to use these electrical disconnects, and someone who claims to be an electrician, put the lock on one of these in the on position and climbed into a machine. Not to mention that one of the steps of lotto is to verify that whatever you've locked out is off before stepping inside of it. Essentially, locking it in the on position wasn't the only failure of procedure, but it was the dumbest one. My document processing clerk was getting married and going on his honeymoon, so I got a short-term temp. It wasn't a temp to hire, everything was out in the open through a legit temp agency who generally did pretty good screening. The temp's very first day, they show up with a box of things, photos, mugs, office equipment, pen cup, task light, etc. Comma stuff to decorate a cubicle with. I advised them not to unpack, we were getting right into training. Within 2 hours after I cut them loose on a computer with a "let me know if you need anything or have any questions," they said, "This mouse is hurting my wrist." It gave me carpal tunnel. I'm going to need workers' comp paperwork. I made an immediate call to the agency ending this contract, then told the temp, your paperwork is at the temp agency office, go ahead and go see your rep there. They left their box of stuff behind. I had to have the temp agency come pick it up. I worked for a small city in LA for many years. I was on the board that interviewed for a new intern for the recreation department. We went through the process, made our choice, made the job offer to a nice, smart girl fresh out of college. She was a little bit of a hippie, casual, relatable. It was fine, all accepted. The girl showed up with a gigantic pet, anaconda, edited, Python wrapped around her neck on the first day. She took casual to a whole new level, right back out the door. We hired candidate number 2 instead. New guy started at work, a bar. Seemed pretty cool. 3 days later we were all sitting around having an end of shift drink when the manager calls the new guy into the office and fires him. New guy isn't 21 yet. Why would you drink at work when the manager damn well knows your age? I was fired on my second day as a line cook at a Mitchell's restaurant in Washington State back in the 90s. Turns out I was hired just to threaten the job security of a long-time line cook with an attitude problem, to keep him in line. He got the message and apologized to the manager, and I was fired for breaking a yoke when flipping fried eggs one time. I'd been a line cook for a few years by then and thought I was doing pretty good. I was taken out the back door and terminated on day 2. Edit. This really seems to be blowing up. Happened in Oak Harbor back in mid-1990s, so yes, I did find another job since then. I was peered, but got over it quickly. Cooking for a living was hard work, standing in a hot kitchen for 10 hours at a time, going home splattered with grease, getting yelled at by waitstaff and management. I don't do it anymore. Thanks for all the HUGZ awards, guys. Less than a week. Hired a new guy at the shop I worked at. When he got hired he did some side work at his house and claimed he did the work at said shop. He put a motor in a truck for some kid and the motor blew. Kid's mom comes to the shop raising hell over our style work. GM was out of town on a business trip, so when he came back that Friday he fired him. My sister was fired one day one. My dad had his own small medical practice and would hire me and my sisters as our first job to be his receptionist and file insurance claims, so we could get some workplace experience before we went job hunting in the larger world. My older sister worked for him in high school for a year. I worked for him for 2 years, then it came time for my younger sister to take over. I brought her to work to start training and said the number 1 rule in the office was, at work he's not dad, he is the doctor and the boss. She sassed him in front of a patient her first day, with all the venom and sarcasm a teenage girl can muster when dealing with a parent asking her to do something. He fired her on the spot and I had dragged her out of there. Mom told her at least she'd get paid for the couple of hours she managed to be employed. Edited, my first wholesome award. Thanks. Bookkeeper. The guy was hired as a senior auditor for the international subsidiaries of our group. Referred to credit and debitors left and right. Maybe bringing a machete into the office on day 2 to slice a watermelon wasn't advantageous either. I know exactly that 99% will find the machete funnier. But for bookkeepers, the first thing is pure cringe. I owned a construction business and we recently hired 3 new employees due to expansion. I didn't get to meet them yet as my business partner was the one who interviewed them and watched them get started on the first day and would check in on them most mornings. Along with the new hired, we promoted one of our best workers to manager to oversee them. So after a few days I noticed that we were behind schedule on the job. This wasn't all that surprising because we had the new hires, but I decided it's best to go in and check it out to make sure everything was going well. So I call up my manager and tell him to go to a different site. We did multiple sites each day, and that I will take over at the place with the new guys. I arrive at the site half an hour late due to traffic and everyone is already hard at work, and in fact they are working efficiently and correctly on everything. I asked them a few questions about what they are doing and so on and get all the right answers. I figured the delay was just the first 2 days of learning and I'm very pleased that everything was picked up and seemed to go well. Now it is important that at this point I didn't actually introduce myself and nobody asked who I was, so it seems everyone just assumed that I was just another worker from the company they never met before. So 2 hours before we are supposed to finish for the day, a guy comes over and says, "Hey, just so you know, we're all gonna head out now, but clock in that we worked the whole day." Manager allows it, and the owners never notice. So that is the story of how I fired 3 new hires on the first day I met them. And also how I had to fire our best worker. First week, he's called over to the unstaffed truffle counter by a customer. Hasn't been trained in truffles, so he just grabs one from the display case and sells it to the customer. He doesn't know the display truffles are made of plastic and the customer has already paid $90 for it when he realizes. Still not sure if it was an honest mistake or if he was planning to pocket the money. Either way, fired. Day 1. He hit a parked car in the parking lot, with the person still inside. When he was confronted he lost his mind and even used threats. The man he hit walked up to security and said, "Don't let that man into my building. People like that don't work for me." He hit the director's Porsche. He was escorted out by security on his second day, and promptly delivered to waiting police officers, about 5 of them. He'd apparently beaten his wife pretty severely and then just left for work like NBD. Never thought that they'd come looking for him. This is the opposite route here, but I found it amusing. My boss was out of town and I managed a tea shop near a Starbucks years ago. This kid came in, foreign, and said he was supposed to start today. We were hiring and I trained him, etc. My boss came back 2 days later and had no idea. The kid was in the wrong place, but he stayed with us. Hired on the spot without even applying. I work as a bartender. He came in for a few pre-shift drinks before his first shift. At the same bar he was hired on as a cook. Spent the time talking about just getting a new job too. He was clocked on long enough to be officially fired. I think 2 days. He destroyed some product but said he wasn't. The boss gave him an order but he took a walk through the warehouse. He got caught 2 times smoking outside. It's not allowed, we're a food company and have a room for smoking. And he was suspected of stealing but there was no evidence. This all happened before our supervisor caught him the second time smoking outside and then fired him. We used to bet on which new hire would last longer than a week. Gets hired, celebrates new job, drug tested, gone by lunch. Had a co-worker get fired halfway through his first day. Was a well-qualified rep, plenty of industry experience and seemed cordial enough. He got fired on his lunch break when management and HR took him to lunch and he made racist jokes about several ethnicities. He was going to be the rep for our El Paso market, which is incredibly diverse, so he was told not to even bother coming back from his lunch break. This happened last week. New girl is hired and right off the bat starts telling me that she regrets taking this job, despite being unemployed for 4 months, because there are so many new people, so it must be a bad job because high turnover. Not really true. We just got bought by a large company and they are hiring more people because we have more business. She tells us all about how it's her birthday and she's going drinking after work. Does a no call no show the next day, which is her 3rd day. We all assume she quit. But the next day she comes in and starts just trying to work like nothing happened. The supervisor asked what happened and she said she got in a minor car accident. He asked why she didn't call and she said she doesn't have a cell phone. Despite being on her cell phone constantly in the office. He decided to give Jo one more chance but gave her a lecture about how she needs to communicate properly about missing work, and one more incident will be an automatic firing. Next day, no call, no show. On the first day, he showed up absolutely reeking of pot and asked a bunch of people if they would buy him a burger. Later he started acting like we'd been best friends his whole life and told me to call him Snowman, said he could get me anything I wanted and asked if I did heroin SMH. The HR lady was walking by and asked to see him in her office. Didn't see him again. Incredibly strange office worker turned up each day with wet hair, wearing loose-fitting pajamas and shuffled around in her slippers. Lasted about a week before she was let go. Got a job doing light electrical assembly work, big 3-phase cables, stripping wires and attaching a socket to one end, plug to the other. I was about 20, working my summers at uni. It was a sweet deal, they paid way above minimum wage for a dull freaking job. They had a contract to make 1,200 of these cables, and I could do about 30 a day by the time I left. They hired 2 of us on a 9-week contract or something. First guy lasted until lunchtime. Second guy lasted the week. Third guy was a big ol' racist and lasted a day. Finally, I just got a mate of mine to join me, and he and I loved it, earning decent money for a boring job. Backstory, I met a dude through another dude, and he and his pregnant girlfriend had nowhere to go. I had an insane amount of acreage and I felt bad for the guy, so I let him stay in his RV on my land, and I even hooked him up to running water and electricity, all of which I paid for. He had a part-time job delivering furniture and never made enough to pay me the paltry $100 he promised to pay me every month for helping them out. When I'd confront him, he'd tell me he just never worked enough hours to provide for his girlfriend and pay me. I mean, I'm sure the copious plumes of marijuana smoke coming from his RV, which was tiny and contained his pregnant GF, didn't help matters. I blaze too. This isn't a judgment on talking, but a judgment on not paying your rent before toking. So, proactively I got him a job at the hardware store I was assistant manager at until I finished my degree. This was 11 years ago. He came to work, and after 2 hours on his first day, just left. Like walked out, went back to the RV which was parked next to my house, and never said anything and never returned. Told me it was a bull's job that was beneath him. It seriously ruined my reputation at that store, and luckily that wasn't my career path or anything. Had a new guy that got hired and was here for maybe a week. He would take long bathroom breaks, but no one thought much of it originally. He sat right at the doorway to the department's area. We had probably 10 people in a large room for this particular department, and one day his boss went to the bathroom, and when he came back the guy just had porn playing on his iPad that was propped up on his desk. The guy turned and looked at him, reached over and hit the lock button and said, "Can we just pretend this didn't happen?" No, we can't. Gone pretty much immediately. I worked in a restaurant for my first job in high school. I was about 16 when we hired on my co-worker buddy's little cousin. This kid was a year younger than me and a total S-head. No one liked him because of his attitude and behavior issues. Anyways, kid gets hired and at first he's chill. Him and I both loved the same band, so we had a mutual bond and common thing to talk about. Other than that, couldn't stand him much. But during his first week he starts to step on people's toes quite easily because he notices some of us who are friends liked roasting each other, and he thought he could join in, but the comments he was making wasn't silly banter. It was full-blown rude comments that made some of us mad and get selective over when we'd joke back and forth with each other. We also started to notice this kid didn't do his job properly either. He worked dish pit when working alone, and his lack of proper cleaning of dishes, cutlery and etc. Threw everyone behind on their closing tasks cause we'd have to ask him to rewash everything due to food chunks being all over things. After 2-3 weeks a number of us complained to management. This kid's older cousin even complained about him, it got so bad. The last straw I think for him was taking this dishwasher sprayer and started to spray people as they walked into the kitchen. He got screamed at by a number of us and was fired a few days later when it was brought to management and noticed how angry all of us were with this kid. Not the quickest, it was around a week, but definitely the most memorable. Drunken office manager headbutted an autistic IT recruitment consultant after an argument about Brexit and then being shunned when cigars were handed out. I worked at a doggy daycare. 4 group play dogs were put in rooms according to size and we would rotate through the rooms during our shifts. They hired a new girl and on her first day she went into the big dog room and cried hysterically because she was afraid of them. I don't think she made it 2 hours. Technically not fired, but this girl shows up for her first day at Jimmy John's. We get swamped with a lunch rush. She gets asked to take out the trash out back. No one ever heard from her again. Lasted maybe an hour. 10ish years ago, working at a well-known Italian chain restaurant in the States, new hire server was only a couple weeks in. Regional manager had come for a surprise visit and as he walked into the kitchen this server proceeded to loudly exclaim NGGA. Come on. To the line cook. Regional manager was African American, server was white, server clocked out immediately. I had an internship in college at a government agency. Another intern was told they could no longer work there at 3 PM his first day due to his parent being a higher up and HR instituting a no nepotism policy. 1.5 hours into shift as an animal care worker, I was showing my trainee how to clean the kitten rooms and started him on the easiest cage. We're talking neonatal, 6-day-old bottle feeder kittens. I explained how to set up the kennel, clean them up, etc. I turned around to grab some towels and a fresh hot water bottle when I heard a thump. And then another thump. Turned around and he was tossing the kittens to the other side of the kennel to move them. Like, underhand lobbing a softball, just tossed 3 kittens out of his way. I freaked out and yanked his aide down to the supervisor's office. His excuse was the kittens were attacking him, and he felt threatened. So he threw them. No warnings. Fired on the spot. The kittens all were fine and got adopted out a few months later. I was doing a job in the Middle East. It was for a major port there. We had a new kid show up the previous day from the US. I think he was relatively fresh from college. Around 1 AM local time, I get a call from the IT department to track down this kid's PC because S for Brains was torrenting from his work computer using the company VPN. This is all kinds of insanely bad idea, from risking access to our servers, to straight up getting flogged by the local government. So I wake the kid up by banging on his door, walk over to his laptop, yank it from the wall and pull the battery. What the frick? I'll let you know in the morning, and I took his ass back to my room and went to sleep. In the AM, I was told to drive him immediately to the airport. He was fired. Walks in 15 minutes late on his first day reeking of weed with bloodshot eyes. He didn't even get to clock in. I worked at a swimming pool store in college. Part of the job was to bring the chemicals filter sand pools salt etc out to the customer's vehicle. The sandbags were like 50 pounds, 22. 6 kg, the salt bags were like 40 pounds, 18. 1 kg. We needed another set of hands to help out around the store. There were some not so physical aspects to the job, but our preference was to have someone who can handle both the retail duties and the warehouse duties. So my boss let the recruiter know that we had a preference for anyone, male or female obviously, who could handle a little heavy lifting. They found us a match and ensured that she could handle all the responsibilities that we wanted. The next day, the new worker who walks through the door is about 5 feet, 165 cm, and 110 pounds, maybe 115 soaking wet. And she was wearing fuzzy slippers. We work in a warehouse of heavy objects. I'm not one to judge off appearances alone, but I was skeptical. Either way, I showed her around the warehouse. When a customer comes in to get some salt for their pool, I put her to the test and asked if she could load up 2 bags and bring it out to the car. After 3 minutes of what should have been 30-second work, I walked out into the warehouse and she was struggling to even get the bag off the ground. She was gone 30 minutes later after a total of an hour and a half of work. And my boss told us she was the one who said that the heavy lifting was no problem. Co-worker's first day at McDonald's. While walking through the kitchen, the manager handed him his uniform. He stopped dead in his tracks in the middle of the kitchen and stripped down to his underwear to change into the uniform. First the shirt, then the pants. He was fired by the manager who had handed him the uniform before he stepped out of his pants. It was the only time I've seen someone fired publicly. All of the crew members and anyone waiting in line to order food saw this happen within about 90 seconds. I work IT for the federal courts. We've had a few fired before their start dates for lying about having felonies. However, the best one was the one fired after 5 minutes. The person who showed up was not the person who was interviewed via Skype. I had a guy walk out before lunch. We didn't do anything to scare him off. All of a sudden, like 2.5 hours into the shift, he was just like, "I gotta go, man." And when we asked what was wrong, he just ignored us and said, "I just gotta go." Called my boss. She called HR and never heard what the story was, but it was super weird. Another odd story about a year ago from the case where the company sucked. I worked for a document sorting and security company. They'd scan your hard copy files and stuff. I was just a temp hire for this big project, hiring a lot of folks. Then one day, like 2 days before Halloween, they go, "Yeah, so we don't know when the project will get here, so we don't need you also. Just don't come back unless we call you." One guy who was probably like 20 had started the day before, and this trash pile company just laid us all off. When they called me after Thanksgiving to come back, I just lied and said I had a new job. Frick that place. Not the funniest story, but a few months before we all started working from home, a new guy started and was fired within 1 day as we found out he has past convictions and had actually served part of his sentence in the prison he would be working in. Didn't find out until he started and someone recognized him. One of the vetting ladies was fired due to this as well, since she didn't bother to do his checks properly before he started. A shop I used to work at hired through a temporary agency. After a few months they either hire you full-time or let you go. They brought this one kid in. He worked good and they were going to hire him full-time. The supervisor brought some paperwork for him to get hired on. He filled it out but forgot to sign something. The supervisor brought the paper back to him to sign but couldn't find him at first. She found him smoking during shift by the emergency exit door. Had to fire him on the spot. I worked in the signage industry for many years. One day some guy walks in looking for work claiming to be a sign writer. My boss asks him if he has brushes. He says absolutely. So my boss says, "Okay, we need someone to go and paint a 5-meter logo on the wall at the gym." It's basically a couple of circles with Helvetica text in between and a stylized dancing man. Pretty basic stuff. We give him the layout and the paint and off the guy goes. 4 or 5 hours later we get a call from the owner of the gym. He tells my boss to come and fetch this guy before he has some kind of breakdown inside the gym. We get there and he has literally got 2 tiny little artist brushes. A number 1 and a number 4 or something, and he is trying to freehand this freaking 5 meters circle with them. I almost cracked a rib trying not to laugh at this guy. He was sweating bullets trying to get this done. No marl stick, no tape, no chalk line. Not even a normal 2-inch paintbrush. Just this little freaking 4mm round paintbrush, and he's painting this 50mm thick circle by eye. Holy yes, we laughed about that for days. It's my first day after my 2-day weekend. Food service, so days off vary from person to person. A guy comes in. I've never seen him before, but by his direction and my co-workers' reactions, I can tell he's a new employee. He's smelling of alcohol. He grabs some food, without putting in an order for it, right in front of everyone, including one manager. He asks one of the servers where the takeout silverware is. Server redirects him to me, the host, since takeout stuff is part of my duties, not the servers. I show him the silverware, he starts grumbling, and then returns to the server and gets on their case about why the hell didn't they tell him where it is. This escalates to a fight that culminates in him getting tackled to the floor by the manager and the cops being called. Turns out, that wasn't the first time he's shown that kind of behavior. The day before he mouthed off at the general manager after she instructed him to take out the trash, insisting that it wasn't part of his job, it was. He later said that he didn't know she was the GM, despite her shiny, golden, as opposed to the normal white, name tag with general manager written on it. We never saw him again after the fight. He had been there only 2-3 days at most, and was still in training for the position he was hired for. I worked at a high security workspace for a while. Under no circumstance could you take photographs anywhere inside the building, and you were strongly discouraged to post on social media where you worked. Something to do with the competition finding things out, so this guy took a picture of his employee pass on his first day and posted it on his Facebook talking about how happy he was with his new job. Work found out, I think his FB wasn't even set on private. He was gone quite quickly after that. 2 days. Hired for a high-level technical position. Spent first morning on phone with IT support trying to get the printer set up. Address of the printer was on his orientation material and written in huge letters on a whiteboard next to his desk. Spent afternoon screenshotting pages from the online corporate training class. Don't be zist, don't be a D, don't break the law, etc. And sending them to the printer. Corporate training takes 5 hours for speedsters and 4 hours for people that take their time. Spent entire next day collating training printouts. He was fired before he completed the mandatory course. At first he looked normal. Then sometime around lunchtime he suddenly screamed on top of his lungs, "If the office." When people run to him to see what's going on, he told them I was trying to see how loud I can scream. He was gone before his scream's echoes stopped. Guy was recently hired to work at office of his girlfriend's. Found out she was fricking the boss, so he s in the work microwave. More of a quit. Not fired but quit. Came into the office and was wondering why his computers were not C2. We work in IT. It's a good test of someone's patience. Then just did in-house training for a week, ignoring everyone trying to get him involved with our network. 3rd day, just sat in front of his computer and didn't log in. 4th day, accused lead engineer of being a racist. 5th day, submitted his resignation to HR, then tried to take it back. HR didn't play. Called our division chief and said he was going to shoot up the office. Was a week we still talk about in the office. Dude came into the factory, worked an hour, got sent on break and got sacked before he made it back onto the factory floor because he was caught peeing in the trough sink next to the urinals. He was on site for a total of less than 2 hours. The real kicker was that he was a recently redundant professional chef who was just trying to keep himself going whilst he looked for another local chef job. What kind of professional chef doesn't know the difference between a urinal and a fricking sink? I worked at a grocery store in high school. One shift there was a new girl and we started talking. She told me it was her second shift and before working here she'd worked at Claire's, chain store that basically sells cheap jewelry targeted to teen girls. She admitted that she was fired from Claire's for stealing. A few weeks went by and I hadn't seen her again, so I asked my boss what happened. Turns out she was caught stealing from the register on her third day. The guy wasn't fired, but I was working at a pallet manufacturer. Old business, very old barn where we cut all the wood. There wasn't any circulation even with both barn doors open. Summers in the barn topped 40°C, and this big redhead guy was hired the day before a heat wave. Super nice guy, but I totally thought he was gonna collapse within the first hour. 11 AM rolled around and he had disappeared. Turns out he left after our first break and didn't come back. He lasted from 8-10:30 a day. She was a high school student, still in training, and the boss basically abused her. He didn't give her a break during her first shift, was constantly looking over her shoulder and criticizing everything. Too big. Too small. Too curved. Too straight. That wears on a 15-year-old. She was not allowed to sit down, use the bathroom or eat. At the end of the day, she had blisters all over her hands from working unprotectedly in 2 degrees Celsius with metal equipment. She was nearly crying when her boss scolded her for putting the whipped cream on the side, per customer's request, instead of on top. She got fired when she arrived the day after for being late. She was an hour early. She was sad but also glad she didn't have to work in that ice cream salon anymore. Her hands took a week to heal. First day of work, a co-worker asks for a short break and some space in a storage closet to put down his prayer rug. Was fired almost immediately. About 6 months later we were all laid off when the company went bankrupt, paying out his discrimination lawsuit. I took a temp job for a 2-week period where I literally saw hundreds of these. The contract, I later found out, was a telemarketing company run by a shady freaking lawyer that found a technically legal way to commit fraud and was exploiting it as fast as he could to make bank before the loophole got closed. This meant it was exceedingly easy for a new hire to say something which would constitute actual fraud completely by accident. How easy could that be? One use of the word "we" on a phone call was instant cause for dismissal. I showed up on the first day with 30 other people. They brought us into a conference room and we were told we were all hired and would start work that day. But that more than 2-3 of us would be fired that day. 15 minutes to practice the extremely short script, a 45-minute lecture on the things you must never ever say while closing, and 30 minutes to practice our closing, and we were on the phones. He undersold it. 3-4 were fired easy. Same as the next day and every day thereafter. Edit. They were cold calling people on behalf of legit charities asking for donations that would go to fund a completely legitimate list of things those charities would use the funds for. The fraud part was that the charities themselves had nothing to do with the guy. He just collected a frick ton of money, then made sure that at least 10% of gross collections were donated to the correct charity so he couldn't be prosecuted for theft, and he never implied any connection to the charities themselves, thus no we, so no fraud. The other 90% was obviously his operating costs. CEOs don't come cheap. We had a recent college grad that would use his corporate card for personal purchases. He figured that the company would just keep deducting from his payroll until it was paid off. He was fired after 3 months of constant reminders to stop doing it. I don't think it qualifies as the fastest, because he lasted 3 months, but it was so idiotic. We hired a Chinese guy. He tried to form a really forced and uncomfortable buddy-buddy bond with another Chinese speaker in our office. He made some sort of weird joke to her about how saw her going to lunch with the CEO and she must be having some kind of affair with him. She was, in fact, the CEO's wife. He was gone by the end of the day. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a comment.